Today we'll be working on Unit 8, LT7 notes, solving radical equations. The following are the steps in solving radical equations. First, you're going to cancel the constant outside the radical. Remember that radical is that square root symbol. Cancel the coefficient in front of the radical, and then you're going to square both sides of the equations and solve for the variable. So go ahead and do that on the next slide. One thing to remember is that the square root equaling a negative number, the square root of an x has only a positive solution, so x has to be positive. Okay, so let's start with this first one. We have the square root of x equals 9. Well, the opposite of finding the square root of something is to square it. So whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other side. So if I want to get rid of that square root over the x, I'm going to square it over here, and if I square on that side, that also has to square on this side. By squaring on the left side, that just gets rid of that piece right here. So then you're left with x equals, and 9 squared, that's 9 times 9, is 81. So x equals 81. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on this next one. We have the square root of x equals 7. Okay, to get rid of a square root, the opposite of a square root is to square it. So when I square it, that gets rid of this piece right here. But if I square on the left side, I also have to square on the right side. So now I have x equals 49. Okay, now we're going to take these a step further. So before you just had x under your radical. And remember, you always want to get x all by itself. Well, now we have x under the radical minus 7 equals 0. So this is going to take a little extra step. So I'm going to rewrite this. So I'm going to keep my x under the radical. I'm going to say minus 7 equals 0. Okay, so if I want to get x all by itself, the first thing I want to do is get rid of that minus 7. So the opposite of minus 7 is plus 7. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. So now I still have the x under the radical. And then I'm going to say equals. These two got rid of each other, right? A negative 7 and a positive 7, those are gone. And 0 plus 7 is 7. Okay, so now we're at the same step we were on the first slide. So in order to get rid of that radical, we're going to square this side. And if we square that side, we also have to square this side. So this gets rid of that. So now I'm just left with x equals, and again, it's 49. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with number 4. So I have x under my radical minus 10 equals 0. And then first we have to get rid of minus 10. So I'm going to say plus 10. Plus 10. So now I'm just left with my x under my radical over here, and the square, or 0 plus 10 is 10. And now to get rid of that radical, I'm going to have to square it. So I'm going to square here, and if I square that side, I also have to square this side. That gets rid of this right here. Now I'm just left with x equals, and 10 squared is 100. That's 10 times 10, which gives you 100. Okay, if we move on, we have 3. And then under the radical, 3 times under the radical, we have x plus 4 equals 15. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we got to get rid of that 3. We want to, right now it says 3 times. Well, the opposite of multiplying by 3 would be dividing by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that. So I have 3, and then I have my radical, x plus 4, and then I'm going to say equals 15. Okay, so to get rid of that 3, the opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. So I'm going to go ahead and divide this side by 3. And if I divide that side by 3, I also have to divide by 3 over here. Okay, so now I have under my radical, x plus 4 equals 15 divided by 3 is 5. Okay, and now to get rid of that radical, this x plus 4, all of that should be under your radical. So get rid of that radical, I'm going to square this side, and if I square this side, I also square that side. Okay, so the left is squared. That gets rid of my radical over here, so that's all gone. So now I'm just left with x plus 4 equals, well, 5 squared is 25, so I'm going to put 25 over here. Okay, so now I have x plus 4 equals 25. Well, now I have to get rid of that 4, so I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. So those 4's are gone, and I'm just left with x equals, and 25 minus 4 is going to give you a 21. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with number 6. We have 8 times, and then we have under the radical, x minus 3 equals 16. So I'm going to rewrite that. So I'm going to have 8, and then my radical, x minus 3, all under there, equals 16. Well, the first step is to get rid of that 8. The opposite of multiplying by 8 would be dividing by 8. So I'm going to divide this side by 8, And if I divide that side by 8, I also have to divide this side by 8. So now I have the radical, and x minus 3 under it equals 16 divided by 8 is 2. Okay, now I want to get rid of that radical. The opposite of a radical or square root is squaring it. And if I square one side, I'm going to do the other side too. So now those are gone. So now I'm just left with x minus 3 equals 2 squared is 4. So that's going to turn into a 4. Okay, and now we have to solve this. So the opposite of subtracting 3 is adding 3. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So now I'm just left with x on the left, and 4 plus 3 is 7. So x equals 7. Looks like this next slide got put in here twice, so I'm just going to go ahead and put a big ol' X on it. You can skip that one and move on to the next one. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit more complicated. We don't have anything outside in front, so we're not multiplying, but we do have that plus 9. So I'm going to rewrite this. So I'm going to have 2x minus 3, and then outside plus 9 equals 5. Remember, you got to get x all by itself, and you want to start with the furthest thing away from x. So right now, the furthest thing away from x is that plus 9. So I'm going to subtract 9 here and subtract 9 here. Okay, so under my radical, I still have 2x minus 3, and it still has a radical over it, so I'm going to keep that there. So we already got rid of these minus 9, so those are gone. So on this side, we still have the square of root, under the square root or under the radical, we have 2x minus 3. And here it's going to equal to negative 4. Well, there's no number that we could put in this x that could be a negative. So anytime you have a negative on this side, your answer is just going to be a no solution because there's nothing we could put in there that would work under there. So this is going to be no solution because you can't have negatives under the radical. And that was one of those, that was that last thing I read off on those slides. Okay, so let's look at number 8. We're going to do under the square root, 3x plus 1 minus 2 equals 6. So remember, you get as far away from that x as you can. So that we're going to start with our minus 2, and we're going to get rid of that. I'm going to say plus 2 on both sides. And now I have 3x plus 1, and that's still under your radical, equals 6 plus 2 is 8. Okay, and then to get rid of that radical, we're going to go ahead and square it. And it's a positive 8 on the right side, so we know that we can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to square this side and square this side. So that gets rid of those. So now I'm at 3x plus 1 equals 8 squared is 64. Okay, and we're still going the furthest away from our x. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So I have 3x equals 64 minus 1 is going to give me 63. And then it's saying 3 times x. The opposite of multiplying is dividing, so I'm going to divide. And then I'm left with x equals 21. So if I did 63 divided by 3, I get x equals 21. Okay, number 9, I see I have 5 outside the radical. That means that 5 is being multiplied by what's inside. So the opposite of multiplying is divide. So I'm going to rewrite this. 5 with a square or radical x plus 1 equals 5. Okay, so I'm going to divide this side by 5 and divide this side by 5. So now those 5s are gone. So now I am left with x plus 1 under the radical equals 5 divided by 5 is 1. Okay, and then if I square both sides, I'm going to square here and square here. Now my radical is gone. So now I have x plus 1 equals 1 times 1 is 1. And we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. And now I'm left with x equals 0. Okay, number 10, we're going to do the same thing, but now I have a 3 on the outside of the radical, and then I have a plus 5 right after it. So this one's going to be kind of multiple steps. So here I'm going to start with 3 and x minus 4 and leave that under the radical, plus 5 equals 23. Okay, to get rid of that plus 5, I'm going to first start with minus 5. So we want to start by adding and subtracting first. So now I still have 3 and x minus 4 equals, and 23, we're taking 23 and subtracting 5. and I'm left with 18. Okay, so now we're saying 3 times x minus 4 under the radical. So we got to get rid of multiplying by 3. So when the opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Now I have x minus 4 still under the radical equals 18 divided by 3 is 6. And then to get rid of that radical, I'm going to go ahead and square. So I'm going to square this side and this side. So that gets rid of that. So now I have x minus 4 equals 6 squared is 36. Now I still want to get rid of x all by itself, so I need to get rid of that minus 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I'm left with x equals 40. It looks like this slide was repeated again, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that slide, or not get rid of it, but we don't have to do it. So skip through and go right to the next one. Okay, so number 11 says we have a negative 10 multiplied by the radical v minus 10 equals negative 60. So in a different slide, when we talked about having that negative on the right-hand side, we couldn't do that because it wouldn't solve for that v in the middle. Well, we have to do a step, so we don't just have what's under the radical right now, so we have to do that step first. So first we have that negative 10, and then v minus 10 equals negative 60. So we got to get rid of this negative 10 first. So if I divide it by a negative 10, oops, this should be 6d. If I divide it by a negative 10 on both sides, a negative and a negative turn into a positive. So this one will still work out. So we have v minus 10 equals negative 60 divided by negative 10 is going to give you positive 6. Okay, and now I can go ahead and square this side and square this side. That gets rid of this. So now I have v minus 10 equals 6 times 6 is 36. And then to get rid of minus 10, I'm plus 10 and plus 10. So I get v equals 46. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with number 12. Notice you have 10 plus on the outside. Well, that's just like saying 10 plus on the other side of the radical. If it's not in the radical and if it's not right next to it, then we're just going to add or subtract like we normally would. So I have 10 plus, and then my radical, 10m minus 1 equals 13. Okay, so we got to get rid of that 10 plus. So the opposite of adding 10, it's a positive 10. I'm going to subtract 10. So I'm subtracting 10 from both sides. So now I have my radical 10m minus 1 equals 13 minus 10 is 3. And this is all under the radical. And then to get rid of that radical, we're going to square it. So I'm squaring this and I'm squaring this. So get rid of this. So now I have 10m minus 1 equals 3 squared is 9. Okay, so now we got to get rid of that minus 1. The opposite of minus 1 is plus 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So now I have 10m equals 10. And then divide both sides by 10 to get m by itself. M equals 1. Okay, v plus 3 minus 1 equals 7. And that v plus 3 is under the radical. So I'm going to rewrite that. V plus 3 minus 1 equals 7. Okay, to get rid of minus 1, I'm going to go ahead and add 1. So I'm going to say plus 1, plus 1. So now I have square root of v plus 3 equals 8. Okay, to get rid of that radical, I'm squaring and squaring. That's gone. Now I have v plus 3 equals 64. Then I'm going to minus 3, v equals 64 minus 3 is going to give you 61. Okay, when we look at number 14, it's just backwards. Normally we have our equals on the right side, and now they're putting our equals 90 on the left side, but we're going to still work it the same way. So I'm going to say 90 equals 9, 25v. Okay, so that says 9 times the square root of 25v. Okay, so we got to get rid of that multiplying by 9, and the opposite of multiplying by 9 is dividing by 9. So I'm going to divide this by 9 and divide this by 9. So 90 divided by 9 leaves me with 10, and then I have a 25v under my radical, we got to get rid of that radical. So I'm going to square over here, and that gets rid of this. And if I square on the right side, I have to square on the left. Now I have 100 equals 25v. Okay, so those are being multiplied. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide this by 25, divide this by 25, and I get 4 equals v. So we just worked a little bit backwards. Okay, another backwards working problem. Okay, so we have negative 12 equals negative 6 times the radical b plus 4. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that. Negative 12 equals negative 6 radical b plus 4. Okay, it's okay that I have a negative 12, that it equals a negative 12, because I see on the right side I have a negative 6. So we're going to actually divide by that negative 6, which is going to make that negative 12 positive. So negative 6 over here, divide by negative 6 over here. So negative 12 divided by negative 6 is going to give me a positive 2. So 2 is going to equal the square root of b plus 4. Okay, and now we're going to square that so we can get rid of that radical. So that's done. Square here. 2 times 2 is 4 equals b plus 4. I want to get b by itself, so minus 4, 0 equals b. Okay, number 16 is going to be an easy one. So we have 1 equals x minus 5. We're going to go ahead and square both sides first. So I'm going to square this side, square this side. That gets rid of this radical. So 1 squared is still 1. So 1 equals x minus 5. To get rid of that minus 5, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. 6 equals x. And that's it for your notes video today. Reach out if you have questions.